When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to start out by doing the holiday cheers, you guys can see, by doing House Frey. I've kind of been sitting on this video for a long time. It kind of creeped into my mind when I was doing the House Peak video, as both are kind of going to be similarly structured, as we're going to go through the history and the rise and fall of House Frey. And we haven't even necessarily seen the fall of House Frey, but why we might be leading up to that moment. And let me know what you guys think about House Frey, either positive or negatively. So House Frey is very unique and different from almost every other house we really talk about. So every time I come on here, I'm always like, oh, this house is, originated from the First Men. They maybe had land in the deep north, all that kind of stuff. They have this ancient history that we can go back thousands of years for. House Frey is not like that. They're only about 6 centuries old. They're a little older than, for instance, the Targaryen dynasty. They haven't been around much, and that has really led to a stigma of their house. Because of them not having this really great history or ancient history, many houses look down on them. We talked about the Blackwoods and Brackens. They have been at each other's throats for so long, they don't even know necessarily what the conflict even is about or how it even started. They are 2 ancient houses that possibly were both kings at one point. House Frey has never been that ever. They have been in a situation where they've steadily grown in power and even gotten more power than some of these ancient houses like the Blackwoods and Brackens. They've never really had full control, really until now in the main story, when they've kind of risen to power over the Riverlands. And we also don't necessarily know how the first Lord Frey came to be, in terms of like, what did this person do to be granted lands and to become a lord? It kind of strikes me as something similar to, like, say, for instance, Davos. Davos becomes a lord because of what he does during Robert's Rebellion. Could that be something similar here with House Frey? I just don't know. There is no indication of how their house truly started. We do know that the first Lord Frey was granted lands and status, and immediately began building a massive bridge over the Green Fork of the Trident. This person seems very intelligent as well. How do you make your power grow? You go to a position where there's not a ton of houses nearby. Like, the closest to the twins is going to be really the Mallisters at Seaguard. But you also have a lot of land that people are always trying to cross, and there's not a lot of good bridges between some of the rivers of the Riverlands. It creates a situation where if you want to get to one side of the river or the other, you have to pay a toll, you have to pay a tax, and that's exactly what we see in the main story with Robb. So it could also point to the idea that maybe this original person that led House Frey was known for their ability to work the economy or finances, something along that line. Like, they could understand an opportunity here, maybe a business kind of minded person. Again, there's just not a lot to go off of. But now we know this first Lord Frey would not actually complete this task. It would be under his grandson, who would complete the Great Bridge, and then also added wooden keeps on both sides. These were then later rebuilt into stone, becoming the iconic twin castles, aka the Twins. So you see that natural progression, because wooden keeps aren't really all that powerful. They can be burnt down. So the twins very quickly become a source of power, because how do you siege the twins? Well, you have to be on both sides of the river to be able to do so. And if you're already trying to get through the twins, that's going to become a really difficult situation. You're going to lose a lot of men doing so. And so the twins instantly becomes this really defensible position that's almost unheard of in the Riverlands. Like, think about the Riverlands. We always talk about that being the place that everybody goes to do warfare. There's nowhere really to hide. The geography of the Riverlands does nobody any services. I mean, Riverrun is also kind of a hard castle to siege as well, because of kind of the same issue, because you have the different rivers, so you have to encamp it on multiple sides. But the Twins is like that, but to an extreme. It's extremely difficult to deal with. And so that's a big point as to why the twins lived for so long, as they were just a nuisance to try and take out. But over the years, the Freys would grow rich by charging tolls to anyone who wanted to pass. Over time, they became the most powerful bannermen of House Tully, though many older houses still considered them upstart toll collectors rather than true nobles. And that is the case. I mean, House Frey doesn't have noble origins from what we can tell, and the way that they got their power was through tax collection. It was through having a bridge, more or less. But my big thing here is, why didn't you do it? There's a clear issue in the Riverlands that there's not a lot of crossings. Why not make your own bridge and do exactly what the Freys do? I can't blame the Freys for making a great business decision that obviously helped them. And that's another thing that we have to look at with House Frey is, House Frey has a very bad reputation, especially in the normal story because of, well, Walder Frey mainly. But at this early point, like, we don't have any indication that the Freys were not loyal to people that they were serving under. We have no indications that the Freys, for instance, would wait out fights or they were quote unquote cowards. We have none of that indication. And so one of the things that I think really turns the Freys against everybody else, and especially when you see the current Walder Frey come to power, is when you have generations of which you're being treated like trash. Like, even though you are a powerful house, by all accounts, people are not taking you seriously. Like, for instance, Edbjorn being married to a Frey actually makes a lot of sense in terms of, okay, the Freys are your most powerful bannermen. That would happen all the time in the North. Like, think about how many times a Stark would marry one of the other houses in the North. It's actually unheard of for the Starks to marry anyone in the South. And so when you think about that for a second, like, it's kind of crazy to me how the Freys, while being one of the most powerful houses, especially in the Riverlands, gets looked over so easily. That does not the same stigma that, say, the Blackwoods or the Brackens have. And so you can see where the issue arises, why when we skip a little bit later on, get closer to the main story, you're going to see that the Freys have genuine arguments to be upset and treat people the way they do, but at the same time, it's also going to lead to their fall as well. At some point, we also do know that the Freys attempted and failed to conquer Greywater Watch in the Neck. Don't know any circumstances really about that outside of, well, they are bordering like neighbors, and there could have been some squabbles over territory. We just don't really know. We do see the issues between the two sides coming from the Walders end up at Winterfell, and then also the Reeds as well in Book 2, but not a lot there to really discuss. Now, I do want to point this out specifically. This is not a video where we're going to talk about every Frey and every action they ever did throughout Targaryen history or whatnot. This is going to be mainly focused on their fall, like what led to, A, them rising to power to the point where they're even really above the Tullys in the main series, and then also their fall. So I'm not going to be focusing on every little detail. But just to also point out, like, the Freys were not the Freys that they are in the normal story. They have many moments in which they actually go to war. So, for instance, they backed Aegon during his conquest against Harren the Black. They also, in 43 AC, would end up backing Aegon the Uncrowned, who would be killed by Maegor the Cruel. They would take part in the Dance of the Dragons, fighting alongside Daemon in the Blacks. So the Freys didn't sit out the war. Like, they were very present, especially in the early Targaryen wars. Now, this would seem to start to change during the Blackfyre rebellions. Now, the Freys are like that prime house that would betray the Targaryens and or go for the Blackfyres. They're a second-tier house that's trying to rise even further into power, and we see that start to happen maybe in the second Blackfyre rebellion, but the Freys smartly flee White Walls before anything actually goes down. And so what I think is interesting is you start to see already the Freys starting to change. They're trying to now gain more power over even someone like the Tullys. There are some notable things we know about House Frey, like at the tourney of Harrenhal, but not really relevant to what I want to discuss in this video. There's also some other stuff in there as well during the Blackfyre rebellions, but again, I don't think nearly as relevant to what I want to discuss in this video. So this would then begin the long reign of Walder Frey. Now, Walder Frey is in a lot of ways the architect of the rise to the Frey power, but also the fall of House Frey. Because in one hand, Lord Walder would make House Frey grow tremendously in size because of fathering dozens of children, and because he fathered dozens of children, legitimized several bastards, it just created a huge family tree. Now, on one hand, that's good because that means you have a lot of people that can carry out your will. It's expanding your potential marriage alliances. But on the other hand, it pushes alliances within the Frey house itself. It starts becoming every man for themselves, and a lot of that seems to come directly from Walder Frey. One of the clearest examples we get of this is Merritt Frey at the end of A Storm of Swords, and he really kind of spells out how the Frey hierarchy goes. And one thing that is never really present with the Freys, and that they have that reputation in Fire and Blood, for instance, it's never there until Walder Frey takes over. So Walder Frey is the person that we need to really talk about in this video, and that just seems very obvious. So there's a couple of things we can kind of point to that really annoyed Walder Frey personally. One, the Blackfish denied marrying any of his daughters. We also see that Tywin Lannister specifically kind of, I wouldn't say shamed Walder Frey, but outly opposed the marriage of Jenna to Emmon Frey. During Robert's rebellion, Walder also arrived at the Battle of the Trident once it was already won. It seems very clear he was just going to arrive once the other side had more or less won, so that he wouldn't be on the losing side. This is exactly what Lord Tywin does, so we discredit Walder for this, but we also seem to credit Tywin. So I just want to point that out, a little bit of an inconsistency there. But this would kind of start the idea of the Freys being untrustworthy, not loyal, being cowards, being everything that we know of them in the main story. And so everything that had already been happening to the Freys for the years before Walder Frey had taken over, as like how everybody looked down on them, it was even worse now because they were making themselves look like not great people. So you had the mixture of all these houses didn't like the Freys because of classism, I would say, and then also now the way that they were acting. And so as we get into the main story, House Frey has been slowly gaining more and more power, mainly because of their tolls and how many men that they can command. Like, for instance, the Freys commanded a lot of men, way more than any other house in the Riverlands, outside of if you want to consider the Tullys, given they control, like, all of the men. But the Freys were by far one of the biggest supporters for Robb that he needed. And so when you come into the main story, the Freys, the one big weakness that they have is they have no real way of elevating their power. They have no marriage alliance into one of the big houses that really matters. Like, yeah, the marriage alliance to the Lannisters is interesting, but it doesn't like place any of the Lannisters to maybe marry into who's going to rule Casterly Rock, like for instance Jaime, or marrying Cersei. Like, they don't have any of those big marriages. And so when they get the opportunity, Walder Frey specifically, to improve that station, to make the Freys now become part of the King of the North plotline, more or less, having a Queen of the North, that's really intriguing because now you elevate your status even further. So the Freys, their rise is that. It's about getting to that next level. That's what the entire story of A Song of Ice and Fire is for the Freys. So as they're doing it, they're making calculated moves. Now, we know Robb ends up breaking that. That turns the Freys against the Starks, and for a lot of reasons because of everything we've talked about in this video. It's just that reminder that all these houses look down on them. And so, Walder Frey, not having the best morals, he turns against the Starks, mainly because it allows him to elevate his position. Not only is he going to get Rosalind to marry Edmure, it's going to cause a situation in which the Freys kind of come to their claim to power. They become more or less in charge of the Riverlands. And that's not to say like they are the paramounts of the Riverlands, of the Trident, or any of that stuff, but they do elevate in power quite heavily. The only people that were really above them are now basically gone and or are imprisoned by the Freys. And that is like the eclipse of their power. That is the strongest that House Frey has really ever been. But as we know in the story, the Freys are not doing well in the north. It seems like Stannis is going to beat them. If Stannis doesn't, it might be Jon, maybe the Wildlings, maybe it'll be some other contingent of the north, maybe the Manderleys. That big force that's up in the north likely is going to fail. We're already seeing in the south, aka the Riverlands, the Freys are being picked off by the Brotherhood. And also there might even be a plan by Lady Stoneheart to avenge the Red Wedding. The Freys are completely falling from their power. The Red Wedding, the thing that defines their house now in the story, will also define their doom. And that's the thing with House Frey is they have a very steady, long rise to power, but they're going to have a very quick falling off of power. And so that is the video. What do you guys think about House Frey? I know they're a favorite on this channel. A lot of Frey sympathizers in the community, especially mine. So let me know what you guys think about House Frey, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.